Well, hello, Bible love. Great to be with you today. I'm still in my grandmother's Bible, which we started back in October 2020. And I've prayed this prayer for you before, but I asked Alan, I thought it might be good for today. It's called For Today, and this prayer is taped in the very first page of grandmother's Bible. So here, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Oh God, give me strength to live another day. Let me not turn coward before its difficulties or prove recreant its duties. Let me not lose faith in other people. Keep me sweet and sound of heart in spite of ingratitude, treachery, or meanness. Preserve me from minding little stings or giving them. Help me to keep my heart clean and to live so honestly and fearlessly that no outward failure can dishearten me or take away the joy of conscious integrity. Open wide the eyes of my soul that I may see good in all things. Grant me this day some new vision of thy truth. Inspire me with the spirit of joy and gladness, and make me the cup of strength to suffer souls. In the name of the strong deliverer, our only Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, Alan, before we get started, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
We talked about last week when John was on about your celebration of new ministry. Can you tell us how that
Yeah.
went?
Yeah, it went well. Jimmy Hartley was a disappointment, as you can imagine. I'm
I
surprised
listened to
he's still
the sermon.
ordained.
It was good. I disagree
No,
with you.
it
It
was
was good.
very good. Jimmy is an excellent preacher. He also shared some embarrassing stories that we don't need to repeat here. Y'all can go find it online if you want to hear about the tragic gift I almost purchased for Virginia Seminary, or the
Mhm.
donkey I bought for the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, or any other number of things that I somehow get into trouble when I'm with Jimmy. But no, it was great. It was a great celebration. There were folks from the Diocese of Texas, right? Because my diocese is reunifying with them. And so some of them were there, including my dear friend Beth Fain, who we need to have on
Yeah, we got to have
the
Beth on.
podcast. I don't know why I haven't thought of that. Other folks, Bishop Mayer was there. It was great. It was a good time to celebrate St. Martin's and the work that we are all doing together. So I'm official, I guess. They can't get rid of me. Although yesterday, they're starting flooring work in my office. And so yesterday I had to pack up my office. And so the senior warden walks in and I'm literally boxing up things on my desk. And Keen's like, you can't do that.
Yeah, right. We just got you, and now you're boxing everything up. Well, Alan, I wanted to say I watched it online because I couldn't be there in person with you. And the theme that I saw, both with Jimmy and Bishop Mayer and you and all the people that were there, is that you will do this work together. And that is really the most important thing we can do when we think about ministry. It's not just about the rector, it's about the people working together to live into God's kingdom. And so I'm so excited for this for you and the people of St. Martin's. And it was a joy to watch. And I'm going to come in person and see it myself soon. So we'll figure all that out. All right. What are we
Yeah,
talking about?
we are finally going to get our way through Second Kings. We've been working through, and we've only been in Kings for a couple of weeks, but it feels like we've been here for a long time because it's the same thing over and over. It's a list of kings, and they get maybe a sentence, maybe a paragraph, and talks about, oh, they did this, but they didn't do it like David, or they really screwed up here, and here's what's going to happen. So it's a little bit more of that, and then it ends kind of tragically and leaves us on a cliffhanger. We'll talk about that when we get there. But we are going to get through chapters 11 through 24. This is a pretty big chunk, but again, Second Kings is highly repetitive. Just swap out the names of kings, but the facts kind of remain.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Alan, because I was kind of thinking about this. So, the whole point of all of this sort of traumatic time was trying to unite these kingdoms, right? Of Judea and Israel to find a good leader and to continue to be in covenant with God. And it continues to break. So, like, 11 starts with actually a queen, but it really, like, for no joke, like the whole bit that we're talking about today is literally different paragraphs of kings, like that they get like a paragraph, and it may be that they reign for 3 years or 40 years or whatever, but this theme that we continue to kind of feel ourselves in the first and second Kings is nobody's making it work. It's not happening,
Yeah.
which is much like the last 2,000 years,
Yeah,
right?
and there's so much hope, right? Like you look at 2 Kings 11:17, for instance.
Right.
Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord, the king, and the people. They would be the Lord's people, and another covenant between the king and the people. There's hope. There's a new king. This king is recovenanting. And then you move down a little bit more, and um, there's promises to like be no more worship of Baal, right? Jezebel and the whole other gods thing is like, God, we got it this time. And then we get to 2 Kings chapter 12. It says, throughout that time, the priest Jehoiada instructed him. Joash did what was right in the Lord's sight. So there's even more hope. This king is listening to the priest, right? And so maybe, but then verse 3, yet the high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. So you promised that we were going to get rid of these altars to unknown gods. You promised that we were going to stop worshiping all this. The priest is telling you to do all this, and you're making a covenant with God, but yet the high places were not taken away
Yeah.
because we're
You know,
human.
exactly. Well, I sent Alan a little celebration of new ministry present in the mail, and it's this blessing that I really love. But one of the things in that is don't forget to rejoice, for hope is always just around the corner, right? And I love that. And I feel that in my heart. And they must have been feeling that too, right? Like you were pointing out, there's hope, there's hope, there's hope. But then it just is this downward, upward, downward, upward. That's like emotionally draining, right? And that's kind of how life is too, right? We just downward, upward. What are we going to face today? But how do we continue to keep the hope in God? Something in 13 that happens that's pretty significant because, as we talked about last week, there were these two prophets who actually were maybe more of leaders than some of the kings were. But one of those prophets, Elisha, actually dies in 13. And I think that is significant because then this war breaks out again, right? And so again, I feel like we're kind of repeating ourselves over and over again, but these wars, these kings, these prophets, it just keeps happening, right? And that must feel so frustrating, you know?
Yeah, it goes into, there's Israel recaptures a city and there's more, I'm sure, bloodshed and war and all of that. And then you move on to 14 after all this. And for the Lord saw that the affliction of Israel was very bitter. There was no one to help Israel. Like you can
Yeah.
just hear the writer saying, where are you, God? Where are you, King? Where are you, prophet? Where are you, priest? Where are you, anybody? There's no one to help Israel.
This reminds me, today is the 8th birthday of my little niece, Jane Anna. And I think I've talked about Jane Anna before. When she was a month old, she was diagnosed with cancer. She had a tumor. And, the story is awesome because Jane Anna is cancer free now, but she went through a really hard time. And I remember us saying, where are you, God? How do babies have tumors, right? So that's just like one example. Same thing that we're feeling here. Like, where are you, God? And I can think of a million things in that, where are you, God, when your kids are having a hard time? Where are you, God, when there's a terrible diagnosis? Where are you, God, when we are feeling broken and lost? But the beauty of all of this, which was happening in Kings and is happening now, is God never does forsake us. God never does leave us. We are still in relationship with God. And it's so easy to forget, though, isn't it? Why
Yeah.
is that? You got
Part of, no, I don't have an answer. I have some thoughts. So part of Kings, right, this cycle of idolatry, right, worshiping other gods. But that doesn't start with these folks until they doubt the one true God, right?
mm,
They forget what God has done. When
right.
God is like, hey, remember the Red Sea? Hey, remember all of this? And they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. They go on and things happen and they're like, where's God? We've never seen God. God has never been with us. Never mind our ancestors who were left for dead in the wilderness and God provided bread. Never mind any of that. God is not with us. And then idolatry comes around with, if God is not there, we're going to build our own God. We're going to worship our own God. We're going to look out for ourselves. So, right, like it takes both, and we see it both in here, them forgetting what God has done in the past, not feeling God in the present, and idolatry, like making a new God in the future. And sometimes that, for us today, sometimes that God is us. I'm
That's
going to
right.
work hard enough. I'm going to make enough money. I'm going to do whatever enough because I don't need to rely on anybody else. I don't need
Yeah,
to rely on friends or family or God or anything because I can do it. And that's the height of American idolatry.
that's right. Did you preach yesterday, Alan?
No, I did
Okay.
not.
But you were there, and it was the fourth Sunday of Easter, so it's Good Shepherd Sunday, and I love the analogy of the sheep and the Good Shepherd, and thinking about that in the way that God loves us. Like, I know we're not literal sheep, but like we cannot go and do and be the hands and feet of God without God's comfort, without God's leadership, without God being there with us. Just like sheep don't know how to, stay cool when they need to stay cool or eat when they need to stay without the shepherd. And a lot of that is what you're talking about here. And they keep putting these kings in. I mean, 15 is literally, let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven kings in one chapter. Okay. Then 16, two more kings, three more, four more. Like that, like it just, we keep repeating the same thing, right? And we need that good shepherd, that God, the God feeling wasn't there, felt broken, being tended for and being cared for. And God's like, how do I get your attention? How do I make you see? You know, but
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
human.
yeah. I mean, in 17, it's powerful. It says, the Lord is warning Israel, saying, turn from your evil ways. Um, I commanded your ancestors and sent to you through my servants, the prophets, but you just never listen. And then it goes on a couple verses later, and I love this. They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. Right? Like we can't do it when we follow our own. And you said, I like how you said, we're not literal sheep.
Mhm.
We kind of are,
Sometimes we
because
are.
I do what everyone else does.
Sure.
Right? That's what we all do. Is I want to be liked and I want to be whatever, and so I'm gonna hop on the latest app, or I'm gonna try the latest fad, or I'm gonna watch the latest movie. Right? Netflix literally tells us what everyone is watching, and we watch it, and they make a lot of
That's
money
right.
from it because we're sheep. Right?
That's
Or
right.
like my favorite video game growing up was this game called Lemmings. I don't know if you ever played it. It's all these little people. All they did was like follow each other, and you had to set up these roadblocks or whatever. Because
Oh, really?
all these dumb lemmings, they would literally walk off the side of the cliff unless someone was there to stop them and turn them around.
Yeah.
And here we have in Kings, these people are about to walk off a cliff because they're not listening to the people God put there to stop and turn them around.
Yeah, and that's really what I preached about yesterday in discipleship and being, we do need the good shepherd. We do, and how do we do that? There, I talked a lot about Bishop Curry's book, "Crazy Christians," and that we need that. But I also quoted Frederick Buechner, who says, if you want to know where you're going, watch where your feet are going, because that's the place it's going to take you. And I love that imagery of like, how do we, and I'm sure the people of this time during Kings were thinking the same thing. How do we watch where our feet are going to be the best disciples that we can be? Are they taking us where we need them to go? Are we inviting God into this? Are we asking God, where do we need to go? Show me where my feet are going. And that's the question. And there's no real good answer to any of that. And we know that we're going to keep failing at it as well, right? Because that's what we do. That's what we do. Okay, so we kind of got through 17 there. And then in 18, we get Isaiah. This is not, I don't think this is the same Isaiah that we were talking about earlier. This is a different Isaiah. Maybe not. That one died a long time ago. But this one, the king is like, okay, I hear it. I'm messing up. Let me get your message. Let me talk to you. Give me some advice. And he just puts him right back to God. Like, where is God in this? God's been trying to tell you this, but sometimes we need that person, right? To speak that godly truth to us, to speak that what we need to know. And then there's just more kings and more illnesses. It just kind of keeps going and going and going. And it's hard to read. I'm going to be honest, because it does feel very repetitive in a lot of ways. Do you feel that?
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because like we know the end of the story, right? And we're kind of the all-seeing narrator, or we have the all-seeing narrator that tells us if these people just follow what God says and be faithful, like none of this stuff's going to happen. And that gets into questions of theodicy and why God, that's a really big question. But in the context of this book of the Bible, we see people who just fail to be faithful and pay dear consequences for it. And as a reader, it's incredibly frustrating to see that happen over and over, let alone for the folks who are actually living it.
Yeah.
They don't have the benefit of seeing the generations of this. They just know that the king reigning during their lifetime sucks.
Right.
And we still have temples to all these gods, and we're still being attacked and all of it.
Well, Alan, I don't want to belittle this part of the Bible because for some reason it's here, and there's something to learn from it. So I don't want our listeners to be like, oh, Alan and Mary Balfour are just like, it's the same thing over and over. I hope you don't hear that. But I think what we are supposed to learn from this is when we don't put God first, when we don't put God at the center of our world, this is what happens, right? Is that fair when you think about
Yeah. And I think,
things?
it's repetitive and that can seem tedious, but it's repetitive for a reason. That's because we fail over and over and over and over,
Mhm.
right? And it could be written today and it could slap whatever name of the president we think is going to come be the savior, slap their name on this, and it's the exact same thing.
Right.
President so and so is human, and so we're all going to be unfaithful. Then President so and so from the other party is human, right? We look to leaders. We see it today, right? We're
You
going to be
see,
in campaign season and we're going to try to elect someone to save us. And it's
and we
not
see
going to
it
happen.
in ministry too, right? Like you just had your celebration of new ministry. I had mine, fortunately right before the pandemic. Like I feel like yes, we are the leaders of these parishes, but we're going to disappoint them. We're going to do things that are not perfect, right? We're going to hurt them, not intentionally, but it will be because we are fallible. We are, people, and we have feelings, and we mess up, and we do things that are not perfect. Now, they're probably all made in wonderful love and care. I know that I have never done anything like, oh, I just want to be mean, but I know it's disappointed people, right? Because I'm not God, right? And I don't ever want to be God. I need God. And so I do think there is a lesson to learn from all of this. And it's also part of our history that's really important. These things need to be written down, who these kings were. Even if they failed, we need to understand our history, our Jewish history, because that's what this is, right? And I think that's important. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to tell the truth. Because I think too often people in leadership positions aren't honest about struggles and whatever. And that leads to things like the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. If folks have
Right.
been following along there, like there's kind of a whole reckoning in kind of the megachurch world that we see leaders' flaws exposed on the nightly news because maybe they were unable to share their struggles because of the way we view leadership. We see it with political leaders. We see it, whatever. We put leaders on a pedestal. They're not able to confess or talk about struggles. And then the whole thing just blows up. And so it's, I think about, I'm trying to be intentional um, in my relationships now that like, we're going to talk about disappointments and we're going to talk about hurt and we're going to talk about struggles, and we're not going to brush stuff under the rug because then it's going to come up months or years later and be a thing it probably shouldn't have been. And so let's actually talk about and be honest about. And here, are the kings willing to do that, or
Right.
are they paying lip service to, oh yeah, I'm going to get rid of all these idols and I'm going to get rid of all these temples, but we're not really going to talk about the root of the issue, which is our idolatry, and we think we've got it all put together.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what happens to end the chapter, right? Or to end the actual book. I mean, chapter 25, Jerusalem falls. The temple falls. It all falls. And they're kind of left with everything broke. We tried this whole king's thing. We tried these prophets. We tried all these other things, and we're just broken.
Yeah.
And what is there to look forward to, And there is a lot to look forward to. We know that we get to look forward to Jesus Christ, and that's a wonderful thing. But it must have felt very disappointing, It must have felt hard. It must have felt all the things that we feel when we go through these things too. So I guess I want to say that I have learned from First and Second Kings. A, I need to understand the history, but B, I can see myself maybe not like worshiping pagans, but I can see myself in the idolatry. I can see myself in following along, following the leader instead of saying, we need to have a different voice here. We need to have a different understanding here. And for me, that's God. What about you? What have you learned from First and Second Kings?
That I'm not alone in my tendency to fail over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
so this, right, like this is the human condition, is we seek power, we seek to go our own way, we seek autonomy, we seek to not be controlled by anyone or anything outside of us. But when we do that, things don't go too well. And then we see here generations of we're going to try, and ultimately ends up with the Babylonians coming kind of scorched earth. And that seems to be the end of it. That seems
Yeah.
to be the end of the whole operation, right? From Genesis to here, it had been pointing to something, and now that whole thing seems to be over.
Yeah. Here it is. Here's the end. But you named it. This is human nature, right? That's what we have to learn from the past, future humans will always mess up, but we also have to remember we have a heart that's connected to God, and we want to live in that way, and we want to keep trying in every way that we can. Well, we did it. We got through First and Second Kings. How many books of the Bible have we been through now? I don't know. I can't count it up, but it's a lot. He's going through on his hand, y'all.
I
Like
think
count.
that's 12.
Okay, so 12
That's
uh,
like,
in like a year and
yeah,
a
that's
half.
less than a fifth of the way through.
Yeah, yeah. Got to stick with me,
But
kid.
eventually we're going to get to like, we'll get to Philemon, and that's going to take like half an episode. First, second, third John is going to be an episode. Those are like 3 minutes each to read or something.
But it's a joy, and I love doing it with you. And next week we'll talk about what's happening this summer with the podcast, what Alan and I are going to be up to. And we hope you'll join us. As always, remember that we love you, listeners, but most importantly, God does.